Hello, and welcome to the Nadia podcast. I am your host, Nadia Cater. I am in Nashville. We are in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm joined today by Jamie Trujillo and Rebecca Sherry. Say hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Great. Okay, I love that you guys follow directions so well. Thank
you.
Why are we in Nashville?
We are in Nashville for the annual Coalition on Adult Basic Education Conference. So COABE, we're here for COABE.
2024. Oh my goodness. This was a lot.
Yes, it's not just that we're here for COABE. COABE is done. We're here at the end of COABE talking about it.
We are at the end of COABE, the night before we leave.
Back home. Mm-hmm.
Before we go back home. So we're still in Nashville. We're on Central Time. We're on the floor because there's no good surfaces to record a podcast. So for you guys at home, please appreciate the sacrifices we're making right now.
We're doing it all for you.
All for you guys to talk about COABE, the big one. This is the biggest conference adult education has for our field of literacy, HSC, ESL, ESOL, whatever, the terms. Every program's a little different. Every state's a little different. But this is like our big one, right? So COABE's a lot. I don't know if anyone has ever done COABE before. If you haven't, great. This is for you. If you have been there before, great. This is also for you. Because this is kind of a semi-pointed, but mostly relaxing overall reflection on the experience that we had at this conference. So Jamie, Rebecca, and I have spent a lot of time together the last 4 days.
4 days, yeah.
4 days, because we did the pre-conference, so 4 days all together, and just really filling our brains with everything. How are you guys feeling today? Like right now, in this moment?
I think in this moment I feel very full and very excited. And I'll talk more about why later.
Well, I think you're full is because the amount of food that we've been eating at this conference.
That's definitely been a plus. Nashville has great food, guys.
What do you think of the food, Rebecca?
I think the food is good, but I do have to say that this is not the most vegetarian-friendly state that I've ever been to.
Yes.
You need to like your pulled pork here.
You need to like your carbs here. You need to like your cheese,
barbecue.
Your barbecue. The barbecue has been great.
Fantastic.
The hot chicken.
Mm-hmm.
I
really enjoyed the hot chicken.
That was something else. We were a little adventurous on this trip, so we went a little outside of here's the conference buffet.
Yes, we tried the local fare in many different ways.
I have to say, back to Rebecca's point, if we're comparing different cities where the three of us have been at a conference, which isn't a lot, this is definitely more vegetarian friendly compared to Wyoming, where everything was a burger.
Yes.
Everything was meat.
Or elk.
Everything had meat.
Everything was a kind of red meat.
Yes.
Really great red meat, but
absolutely.
if that's not a part of your diet, you're eating a sad bowl of pasta.
Yes.
So the purpose of today's podcast is that we just want to kind of just dissect and reflect this experience of going to a huge national conference, which, Jamie, remind us, how many people generally go to this conference?
It has grown over the last few years. This year there were around 3,500 people attending.
If you've never been to a place where 3,500 people congregate, it's quite the experience. So this conference, it's always, in different cities every year. Just to give a little context, different cities every year, sometimes different times, almost always in the spring, right?
Yes.
That's generally like fall and spring are conference times. It's also at different venues. The venue for the conference was the Gaylord Opry Resort. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on the Opry Resort?
We're going to tell you later how many steps we put in on a daily basis, but this place was large enough for you to get lost, okay? It also had its own jungle inside.
It had its own climate inside.
Yeah.
It had multiple waterfalls. There was a giant dome over. This sounds like a science fiction film. Like, there was a giant dome, like a biodome, where the sun was shining. There was all these tropical plants everywhere, and there was multiple waterfalls inside.
And a river. Don't forget the river.
There was a river inside with a boat.
A boat ride. Yeah, there was a boat ride, and also the live birds. I don't know if you guys got the live birds in there too.
I got a few live birds I saw. That was, and I wondered aloud, like, do the birds even know that they're in a building? Or do they think they're outside? Because they're so small. And the place was so big. It was like they could spend their whole little bird lives inside the Gaylord Opry Resort and probably never know that they'd never been outside. It also had multiple restaurants, multiple floors. It had a water park on one side. This was a theme park where we were attending sessions about adult education. Like, that just blew my mind. I've never been in a place like that in my life. And I don't think I've ever would have thought to go to a place like this in my, like, I never considered it, but wow, it was so much.
And I will say kind of the takeaway of this is that that's part of the experience of these kinds of conferences, is that you do have this chance to see something that's quite different from maybe like what your own context or your own situation might be, and to also meet other people who are here in a place that's quite different from their context or their situation. Because just because we are here in this large city, we met so many people at this conference that came from very rural communities, very rural programs, very rural states, you know, so it's the whole range of what adult education looks like in the United States. In my first session, I met 2 women from the University of the Bahamas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I was in a few sessions with the state director of Alaska's adult ed program. And she is someone that's very memorable, so that's how I know that was her. And I was like, wow. So we were with people that are in completely different climates, spaces, organizations. Alaska state director has said in different conferences, like, but it always comes up somehow, of like there were instances where students would have to go to classes using dog sleds, right? So like imagine how different that is from us in New Mexico. Dog sled to math class, guys.
Yeah.
That is something that is so outside of our experience. But anyway, so this conference is very big. It could be very overwhelming. But it can also be so enriching as an experience. So, did you guys come to this conference with just ideas of tracks that you wanted to? Because there's multiple tracks, there's multiple themes, topics. Did you guys start off with that, like thinking about where you wanted to go?
I think when I was planning out which sessions I was going to attend, I was really focusing on 3 big things. Leadership in my own role, student leadership, because that's a big part of my role, and professional development, another big part of my role. So I think that when I was looking through the sessions, that's what I had in mind.
What about you, Rebecca?
So this is my second time only of going to COABE, and so I was thinking about that when we were, you know, planning and getting ready for this trip. And I tried to focus my attention also kind of in 3 different areas. I did, of course, go to see sessions that dealt with ESL and ESL learners and things like that. I was also looking at sessions that were talking about IET programs, because we have the IET Institute coming up, and I wanted to bring some ideas because everyone's going to be working on their ideas, and so I wanted to have some things in mind that maybe we could offer to the field and let you know some things that are going on. And then the third thing that I looked at a little bit, because it's a big part of my job with Propel, was the professional development too. So I tried to see some there.
Okay, you guys were like way more organized than me. I was like, professional development. This is my role. This is where we're working. I'm going to see what people are doing. If they have credentialing systems, that's something that we are working on. I wanted to see a little bit of digital literacy, digital skills, because that's been on my mind lately a lot. Well, in particular, practitioner skills, because I think generally what I've been like really thinking about lately is there is a push for digital skills for students. And that is incredibly important. I'm not dismissing that. However, how could you focus on the skills of students when we're not even gauging the skills of the instructors? How can you expect an instructor to teach digital skills if they're not even sure where they are in terms of their own competencies within that? So that's what I've been thinking about. And then, of course, in general professional development, because I'm looking so much to see what other states do. And that is the big thing. That's the biggest thing about going to conferences, especially national conference. It's like, guys, we have 50 states, multiple territories, maybe even some international. Like, there's so much to learn. And I think generally in adult ed, not even just with states, but within programs, we could be so siloed that we don't even like take into consideration that there are other people, other programs, other states that are having similar issues. And they found unique pathways for those issues, right? Or to manage those issues, perhaps. So before we really dive into it, so those were the themes, right? One thing I want to talk about is conference preparedness. For something so big, for so many people, for 3 to 4 days, how do we prepare for that? So how do you guys prepare for that?
Well, I think first off, and we've been doing this for a few conferences now, Nadia created this spreadsheet that allowed the entire Propel team to write in what sessions we intended to attend. That, one, kept us from overlapping, especially if there were several sessions we wanted to attend. And two, it gave us an idea of what was getting covered. How were we as a team covering different aspects of the conference, different offerings? And that spreadsheet has just been so unbelievably helpful every single time we've done that.
Blush. Oh my God. Thank you.
So thank you, Nadia. It really is wonderful. And, you know, speaking of preparedness, on the first day, on the day of the pre-conference, the app, the Whova app that COABE uses, was glitching, and it was glitching badly. So sessions were disappearing out of the app. And because I had put the room that I was going to for each of my sessions, also again, thanks to Nadia because they did it first, I didn't worry about it. I could see where my session was just on that spreadsheet. So that was really helpful. So that really, number one in preparedness was being able to have that spreadsheet and write down everything that we had intended to attend.
I just also want to add that this is the year that COABE stopped printing programs because they want to focus on the app. I'm sure it cost a lot of money to print these, especially for the amount of people that show up. And it's, you know, there's color, there's images and stuff, and that's probably really costly, especially to look good. So I understand, and the app would be way more, you know, engaging. There's more engagement. There is like discussion on the app. You can changing different schedules. You can put in reminders. There's stuff you can do without paper, right? And also find people. You can find people and
you can message people, talk to people. You can ask questions.
You
that
can
the organizers
search.
Can answer.
You can search for things that, you know, like using the search tool.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see the benefit of course, the downside, as well as using any digital technology, is that there's going to be digital issues, the glitching, the crashing. There was a lot of problems on that first day. It was really stressful. So the spreadsheet is a backup. It's also a great way. So how we split it up by team member, by day, by time frame. And Jamie, with your Google spreadsheet skills, like incredible skills that I do not have, talk about digital competencies, right? I do not have this. Is Jamie also modified it so that it includes all the breaks, so that we know when the breaks start and end. We also color coded it by day. And because it was split between people and we put in the room numbers, eventually, you know, in this gargantuan hotel, we knew where certain areas were. So if like, say we were trying to meet up and one of us isn't, you know, answering text because of course we're in a session, that would be rude. I could like, okay, so I'm in Jackson E, and then I'll look at the same time Rebecca is in the presidential ballrooms, for instance. These are the kind of names, by the way. Every big hotel, every conference has names based on whatever. And then I could see, okay, so Rebecca's on the other side or upstairs. So we have a general idea of where we can find each other. Or we know where we're coming from, and eventually you get used to the place, you know, when you're there for a few days, and you can kind of estimate how much time it would take to meet up. So that's kind of the benefit here, the backup, and as well as just keeping each other up to date on what we're doing. Just to go back to the planning a little bit, one of the reasons why we choose different sessions, not just because of individual interest or need or for theme, but we're trying as a team, because we work really closely together, is to try to spread out as much as possible. There are times where there aren't a lot of sessions that are relevant to us, so we do sometimes end up in the same sessions, but most of the time we're trying to spread out as much as possible. So just to make sure that we maximize the time that we're spending.
And I would recommend that for any team. Any team that's sending, more than 2 people to any conference, I would recommend that.
I think that if you're listening to this conversation, and especially if you're planning to go to a conference with your team, there's kind of 2 takeaways that we'd like to offer you. And the one of them is exactly how Nadia and Jamie have detailed our planning process. It's worth the effort to spend your time on pre-planning, because it gets very overwhelming while you're there to start trying to make decisions and looking through a very large agenda and be like, I'm just going to pick something, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. It's probably not going to work out as well as you're hoping. The second thing is, as Jamie indicated, this conference used an app as their way of communicating the session details to everybody. If this happens at a conference that you're planning to attend, and I think this is going to be probably general practice going forward for a lot of conferences because of the environmental issues of printing up these large, documents and things like that, make sure you download the communication app, whatever it's going to be, before you get into the conference, because there are, like Jamie mentioned, 3,500 people there. The Wi-Fi gets a little rough, on the first few moments of the conference when everybody's trying to log in and things are not working out. So by the fact that we had our apps already downloaded and had played with them just a little bit prior to coming into the conference, it really made us feel, I think, a little bit more comfortable and more confident to find what we were looking for, or to not super stress out when the app wasn't functioning exactly the way that we were hoping that it would. So those are some things that we'd like to offer you as, tools if you're planning this process with your team.
Absolutely. To add on to that, I would say planning ahead of time, you can really think of it as taking more active stance on your conference going. Because kind of last minute trying to figure things out, that adds stress and that adds kind of anxiety, especially because you're going to a place you've probably never been to before or only been to once or twice. So you're not really familiar, trying to rush and find rooms and maybe find people, and that adds on, and you lose some of that focus that you could really use in these sessions. So I take it as being present, being an active learner in that sense as a practitioner. It's really just invaluable to put some planning ahead of time, just to get the most out of your experience. Our programs are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars to send teams to learn, to grow. And it's if you're going to spend this time and this money, and of course your own personal money if you're not reimbursed for food, or the food is more expensive than what you're reimbursed for, or any situation like that, you want to make sure that you're making the best of your time, because you're away from your program, you're away from your students, and you want to make sure that time is worth it.
And just logistically speaking, for anyone that hasn't been to a COABE conference, we're talking about more than 20 offerings per session. It's not like you would find at a state level or even a regional level conference. You're looking through so many different offerings for every single block. So you really do want to take that time.
Yeah, and you want to make sure that you're reading you have the time to not just read the titles, but read the descriptions. There was at least 2 sessions where I wasn't totally paying attention to the description. And I ended up being in sessions that weren't really the best for my time. I went to it was actually a really great workforce session, but they were specifically talking about the audience at the program level and at the state level. Like as a director or a state team or the state or the program director or the program instructors. And I'm like, I don't fit in that.
Yeah.
So it was like, I felt really bad. I actually had to leave after an hour because that's when I was like, realized I'm taking notes. I'm like, this is really great information, but this is for direct contact, with practitioners and students in a way that I don't quite fit in, because it's building workforce partnerships. And that was because it wasn't any fault of the presenters. It really was, I didn't read the description closely enough. So the thing is, you leave a session after an hour. Think of it, everything else is at that time frame is starting. So you're either going to something an hour late and missing a lot of information, or you're waiting till the next session and then, okay, there's that hour where you lost. And that really annoyed me.
Though I do want to say, because we had, as we were preparing for this podcast earlier, we had a little bit of pre-discussion. This is Rebecca. And we talked about how one of the things about conferences, though, is to be really going into things with an open mind and going into, what can I take from this? What can I use in my own situation, knowing that it's very likely that my situation is somewhat different than the situation of the presenters? Because I think that I was in sessions where I heard both sides of that, where I did hear people who were like extremely creative and thinking, oh, how could this change and move into another context, my context in my own program or my context in my own state. And then I was in some sessions where some of the audience members were very quick to point out, oh, we can't do that. And that might be true, but you are in this opportunity to get new experiences, to get exposed to a new way of looking at things. So in my personal opinion, I would say take the most advantage of that as you can,
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. To add to that, I was in a session where it was on professional development, and it was a professional development system at the state level. It was actually really interesting information. However, the state had a lot of support at the state level, which is not for every state, not for every program, and they also have way more money than what we get in New Mexico. So, you can imagine like a couple of people that also came from small, underfunded, resource struggling states, and there were like 2 or 3 people who would constantly say, well, we can't do that, we can't do that, I can't do that in my program. This is what I have. We're never given money like that. And what that did to the, unfortunately, the presenters, they kind of didn't really know how to control the situation. So it ended up that they didn't finish their slides, right? They didn't finish their slides. They kind of lost the audience. And I totally understand where those practitioners were coming from. If you spend so many years getting the short end of the stick, and then you're hearing this, people that get millions of dollars and they're doing this thing, of course you're going to be frustrated. Of course you're going to be immediately dismissive. However, there were some things in there that you could definitely take, like the framework they used, the reflective questions, some of the actions that they used. You could scale that down for less money. But because the first instinct, the first thought was, I can't do that. I'm from a poor state. I'm from a poor program. I'm from a poor state association, whatever. That derailed the conversation. Actually, it was harmful to the presentation and to everyone else that was not saying those things, right? It took away from other people. So it's also being mindful of everyone else in the room, right? Yes. Okay, so one thing, going back to preparedness, what I do want to talk about is, we talked about preparing in terms of a team, in terms of sessions. What about generally? What about like preparedness in terms of physically, mentally,
emotionally?
For me, definitely emotionally. Yeah. So what are your guys' best practices for conference preparedness in those terms?
I think one of the things that's very important to consider, we want to go, we want to look professional. Think seriously about your shoes. Okay, think seriously about those shoes that you pack, because you are going to be walking more than you can possibly imagine, and you want to have some comfortable shoes. They can look really, really nice, but make sure you can walk in them.
Man, that is good. So everyone has a Fit app, a Fitbit, steps tracker.
Yeah. So I just want to give you all a clue. Over the last 3 days, I have walked 34,000 steps in 3 days. So Rebecca is absolutely right. Definitely pack comfortable shoes and comfortable clothes. That's something I wish I would have known during my first COABE conference, when I packed heels and my feet were completely killing me at the end of the day. And not to say that doesn't still happen. I still have my days that I want to or need to dress up. But for the most part, I will pack comfortable clothes and shoes.
Oh, yes. Like, the heels are going to make you look fantastic, but they're going to make you feel horrible. So,
and of course, it never hurts to just have a pair of tennis shoes on standby, especially if you're presenting. Have your pair of tennis shoes to just change into when you're done. The other thing I would say about clothing is wear layers. You're going to be doing a lot of walking, like we said, which will get you very hot, but then you're going to go into, most likely, a cold conference room. So bring a sweater or a hoodie.
I'd say bring layers.
Yes.
So this is all personal. How you guys feel comfortable, that's your business. This is strictly for me. I like to be wearing relatively matching attire. So if I'm wearing slacks and a dress shirt, I don't want to wear a hoodie. If you do, that's totally fine. That's up to you. But for me, like, mentally, that would distract me. Because I keep thinking, oh, I look so good, except this hoodie. So I have cardigans. Generally, that's my thing. So, yeah, so removable layers. So just to give you a kind of, like, really, I don't want to be too gross, but basically, how far everything was in every hotel, but, like, comparatively, like, every hotel, like, all the sessions, and when you're planning, you're not sure, because if you haven't been there before, you don't know how far these rooms are, right? But I'll basically sweat through my clothes, walking from one session to another, get into a freezing air-conditioned room, and dry up, and then just be shivering, only to do that over and over again for the 4 or 5 session blocks in a day,
Hence the layers.
Yes.
Layers and, like, a couple of good outfits.
Well, and in addition to thinking about the layers, the outdoor weather and the indoor weather don't have much relationship to each other. So if you're going to someplace that's going to be warm for your conference, like lovely warm in the spring, it does not mean the inside of the hotel is going to be lovely and warm. So just think about that when you're packing.
That is true also. And there are probably not a lot of conference venues that have its own climate. Like, it was more humid in the hotel because of the multiple waterfalls.
Yes.
Inside than it was outside. It was very unreal. It really was like a biodome. So yeah, because you're not quite sure of what we're going to get into, just make sure you prepare for that in terms of clothing, in terms of comfort.
I think, just really quickly to your point, comfort is going to be the biggest thing you want to keep in mind, because you're there to learn, because you're going to be sitting in these sessions for minimum an hour. What do you need to be comfortable and to take care of yourself? And that does include, if you need, snacks, water, that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I would definitely say whatever conference you go to, bring a few snacks and a water bottle. Like, it doesn't have to be full. You can definitely find fountains, but the amount of time it would take to go, walking back and forth to fountains, like, if you're just taking sips one at a time, it's better to have a water bottle. And just exactly what Jamie was saying, how are you comfortable being kind to yourself, listening to your body and your brain? The whole conference, I was lugging around a large rolly bag, and people thought I was coming from the airport.
I actually got the same comments because I also had a rolly bag because last year I had a backpack and that just was too heavy. So I did have the same comments this year too.
I call mine my autism preparedness kit. As I mentioned on this podcast before, I'm on the autism spectrum, and everyone's different. That's why it's called a spectrum. But generally for me, I am really affected by my environment. So I have, it really depends on the day. Sometimes I'll have an extra pair of socks because if I'm walking so much and I'm sweating through my shoes, I'm going to be feeling that all day. I have notebooks to take notes in case, for whatever reason, I can't use my laptop. There were a few sessions that turned out to be in rooms that were so small, there was no desks. And the thought of putting my laptop on my lap and trying to type in that, I would be too distracted. I have my fidget toys. I had my, my comfy pencils that I whatever feels good in my hands. Yeah, and I had chargers in case I was worried about getting lost or I needed to look at the schedule. There was a lot in there. I kind of overdid it this year, but I need to take care of myself. So whatever that looks like for you, make sure you give yourself that time before the conference to prepare for yourself. Be kind to yourself. This interview will continue on the next part of this episode. Thank you for listening to the Nemea podcast.